How to Draw an Eye, Part 2. If you haven't seen Part 1 yet and followed it, then I recommend to go back to my channel and see how I do that process, and that will really help you out in this video. Today's materials I will be using an iPad Pro and an Apple Pen Generation 2. You can use any iPad and any Apple Pen you want. And this glove. This glove, if you don't have it, then that's totally fine, but I like to use it because it basically goes on my ring finger and pinky finger and prevents me from drawing with my hand on another side. So we are in Procreate, and you can pick any color you want for the sketch. Really, you can pick your favorite color, and for this video I'm going to pick kind of like a magenta. And you can just search for any sketch brush. You can try out a million, see what works for you, and then you're going to start following the process that we do in Part 1. So just a heads up that when you're using sketch brushes in Procreate, it's just like a pencil. You can you can control the pressure that you have on it, like hard pressure and light pressure. It works just like a pencil. So you can just pretend that you're using a pencil and paper, and then it'll come out pretty. The sketch doesn't really need to come out pretty, but make sure to not press everything hard like this. You're going to want to use the techniques that we learned in Part 1 of when to use pressure and when to not use pressure. Make sure that you do this all in one layer so that later we can add another layer on top of this. Make sure to keep in mind that the sketch does not need to be perfect at all because this is the rough sketch. We're going to make it neater later. If your eye is small in the middle of the paper and is not really in good proportion like mine is right now, just click this little arrow in the corner right here, and then you can just make it bigger instead of starting over. If you don't like something and you want to fix it, and since it's all in one layer, just click this S right here, make sure it's in freehand at the bottom, and just outline what you don't like. Then click that arrow that we used earlier, and you can edit it any way you want, like I'm doing with the eyebrow. So you can press distort or freeform to make it longer or wider and thicker. Or you can click warp, and you can just do anything you want with it and make it bigger on one side, smaller on one side like I'm doing here. You can just play around with it and see what you like the best. In uniform, you can also click this green dot right here to change directions of what you outline. Like I'm doing here. I'm going to kind of put it a little more diagonal to the left. Make sure to lightly shade in the eyebrow. Don't completely really shade in Procreate like we did on paper in Part 1, because that, again, is what we're going to be doing later when we color it. Next, I'm going to take this layer. We're going to click that N right here next to the check mark. And we're going to have this opacity line right here. We're going to lower the opacity to about 22-ish, and we'll make another layer. Take any outline brush that you want. I'm going to stick with the brush that I have because that's how much I like it, but you can change any brush for this part for the outlining. Make sure that the opacity is way up, because if the opacity is down on the brush, then it'll just take multiple strokes to kind of get the darkness that you want. So make sure that the opacity is all the way up. Then you're just going to start neatly outlining your eye. Now you can outline the whole thing, make sure that there's no openings, and take that color circle, press and drag it, and then put it inside the part that you outline, so that it's less coloring for you to do. And then make sure to color in all the parts that weren't colored. Make sure to use the pressure techniques that we used in Part 1 for the line art too. so that it can come out with depth instead of a stiff eye. Another thing to keep in mind is to not use completely one stroke, but multiple sketch strokes so that it comes out soft and not stiff and hard. Also keep in mind that if you make a mistake and you've got the eraser, like if a line is too wobbly for you, then you can just take the eraser, make sure the size is small, and you can just erase the edges of a line and it'll look less wobbly. Next, take the eraser, put the opacity down, and click on the eraser and click on airbrushing and soft airbrush. Make sure the opacity is down and that the size is the way you want it, so that in parts that you think is too dark and you want to make lighter, you can use this to kind of make it lighter to give it more depth like we did in part 1. Now you can just finish up the line art, make sure to whisk the eyelashes. And then, now we are done with the line art. You can delete the sketch layer because we don't need that anymore. And now we're going to create a new layer, press and hold, and drag it under the layer that we just did. So that everything that we do, it'll not go on top of the art. So next, we're going to color the whites of the eye. You might be thinking, why color it when it's white? You want to add a little tint of blue because the whites of the eye are not completely white. They have like a tint of blue in them. So kind of take like a really pale blue, make sure to not make it too blue, and just color the whites of the eye. Make another layer, click it, and then click clipping mask in this chart right here so that everything that you do will stay on the inside of the line of the layer that you just made. So that way, the iris won't go outside the lines and it'll just give you a little more trust on that. So you can pick any color for the iris that you want. In this video, I'm going to do a brown eye. But you can pick any color you want. It doesn't have to be a normal eye color. You can pick purple, you can pick pink, you can pick yellow, any color that you want. Next thing that we're gonna do is you're gonna make another layer, drag it under everything, and then just pick a random skin color, it can be any skin color you want, and then just color like a shape on the eye for the skin. I'm just going to quickly shade the skin. This will probably be discussed in a different video since we're going to be focusing on the eye right now. But what I just want to tell you is that I'll just take a darker color than the skin color is, shade it where I want to shade it, and then the blending tool, which is this finger right here, I use the airbrush, and you can just blend everything the way you want. Now that we're done doing that, we're going to go back to the top layer, not the line art, but the top layer, and then we're going to add another layer. Then I'm going to take the color and I'm just going to put it completely to pitch black, and then we're kind of going to do a thing where it looks like we're making the eyeliner thicker. So just draw a line across the top of the eye and color it in. Don't mind if it looks weird at first, or if it looks like that the person has too much makeup on, because we're going to lower the opacity later so that it's a shadow. we're gonna go back to layers, and we're just gonna do the same. We'll lower the opacity, and it'll look like a shadow. Ta-da! We're gonna also take the blend tool. If you want to blend it, you can, or you can leave it like this if it looks better to you. But I'm going to blend it by taking the blending tool, but don't completely blend it, just blend the edges so that the shadow looks like it's still there.
By creating an imaginary picture. Usually it's something.
Another way to blend this is you can go to the magic wand right here, then click Gaussian blur, and then you can just slide the top across the canvas to blur the shadow. You can do it this way if it's easier for you, but I personally prefer using the blend tool because I kind of have a little more freedom with it, but you can do whatever you want. You can also change the opacity to whatever you want. Like I darkened the opacity a little bit because I thought the opacity was a little too light. Now that we're done with that, we're going to just take white on that same layer and put it on the bottom. It might not show that much because the opacity is down, but it adds some light to the bottom of the eye. Now, we're gonna go back to the whites of the eye layer, and we're gonna add it right there so that it's under the iris, but clipping mask to the whites of the eye. Then you're gonna wanna take a coral color, not too pink, but kind of in the red section, like a light red. And color the right inside in the corner of the eye and blend the edges like just a teensy little bit. Next, take the color, the original color that the eye was. You can just play around with this to see what color works for you. And then we're gonna add a layer under the shadow, but on top of the iris layer. Then we're gonna click clipping mask. And then we're going to click on that end next to the check mark, but we're not gonna be lower the opacity. We're gonna go to this chart right here and scroll down until it goes to add. This way it kind of has a lighter glowing highlight, and it's kind of glowing a little bit, so when you blend it, it's really cool. I really love this because that's actually how I do a lot of the highlights on the skin of my drawings. But make sure that the color is the actual color that the eye was, because this thing makes it lighter. So if you do a lighter color, it's gonna come out lighter than it's supposed to be. So make sure it's the original color of the eye so that it looks not too bright, not too dark, but just right. Then you're just gonna start making lines. Don't press hard, just press lightly, like that light pressure. Because this is a hard pressure, this is a light pressure. Do the light pressure and just sketch some lines, but put a little bit more pressure as you get to the center of the eye. Now, you're going to take that, you're gonna lower the opacity just a little bit, make another layer, put it to add again, and then you're gonna put a little bit more pressure, but leaving a huge space in between. So what I mean is you're kind of gonna make some lines kind of spacing away from each other. Then you're gonna take the blend tool and you're going to blend the edges, the top and the bottom of each of those lines that we just created. Make sure not to blend the whole thing and just the top and the bottom, because that'll give it the effect. Now that we're done with that, we're gonna click that same layer, and now we're gonna make the highlights of the eye. But first, we're going to want to merge down all of those layers that we just did into the iris of the eye so that it's all in the same one. It's not going to do anything to all the other layers. It's just gonna make it look the same but all in one layer. Now we're gonna take just pitch white and we're gonna click that S that we did earlier and we're gonna outline the shape that we want for the eye shine. Like I said in part 1, you can do any shape. You can even do the same shape that you did when you drew the eye in part 1. But make sure that this layer is also an add so that it kind of gives a little more of a lighter effect. And make sure the brush is on soft airbrush. So I'm gonna do a star just like I did in part 1. And I'm gonna take the airbrush and I'm kind of gonna do this in the corners, but make sure the opacity is low and the size isn't too big, but kind of just enough. You can start doing this with all of the other eyes, but I like to make it lighter in some places. And then you can just take a regular brush and just start flickering a bunch of eye shines everywhere. You can make some bigger than others, kind of put some sparkles to the eye. Now I'm going to take a darker color. We're going to go to the iris layer and we're just going to color in the pupil. Not with black, but just kind of like with the same shade that it has at the top, and then blend the top. Take that same color and then take the soft airbrush and kind of outline the edges, because this also gives the eye more depth. Now we're gonna go back to the skin layer and then just take the soft airbrush again, but change the color to kind of like a reddish, not much of a pinkish, but of a reddish. And again, make sure the opacity is low and make sure the size isn't too high. And then you're just going to outline the bottom of the eye where we drew those lines before. And this gives it a more realistic look. Now, what we're gonna focus on is the eyebrow. So we're gonna make another layer, click the clipping mask, and then we're just going to take, and this will also not be outside the lines, and we're just gonna take basically just a darker color. You can click any color you want, but it really depends on what hair color that your character has. In this case, I'm just gonna do a brown eyebrow because I'm gonna make my character a brunette. So then we're just going to color in the eyebrow. Then we're gonna go to alpha lock so that everything we do stays inside the lines. Then we're gonna take a darker color, go back to the soft airbrush tool, and just lightly shade in the right of the eyebrow so that it kind of fades from dark to light. Then take a lighter color and shade the left of the eyebrow. Next, we're going to go to a hairbrush. It can be any hairbrush you want. Again, you can try out a million, whatever works for you. And then you're gonna take a lighter color and you're just going to lightly just sketch some hairs on the eyebrow. Make sure that these lines aren't white because we don't want to make it look like the eyebrow has white hairs, but kind of just like a light tan because that gives it the highlight. Then take white, just white, and go to the airbrushing tool. I'm using hard airbrush. And you can just add more eye shines like I did at the bottom of the eye here. You can add some to the iris. You can just play around, do finishing details, do whatever you want to the eye to make it your own. Then we're going to make the eyelashes a little thicker. So go to materials and you have some hairbrushes right here. You have fine hair, flowing hair, and short hair. I'm gonna go with flowing hair, and the brush is black. So you can just lightly wisp on some eyelashes. Make sure to not make it too square, but just to kind of add some extra eyelashes. And there we go. Our eye is done. I really hope that you liked this video and found it useful. And I hope that you enjoyed my part 1 and part 2 on how to draw an eye, and now that you're a professional at drawing eyes. And please like, share, subscribe, and comment on what you think of this video and what you'd like to see next, so that I can keep teaching you guys and you can keep learning more, so that one day you can just create your own portrait or a character combining all the tutorials that we did. See you in the next video. Bye!